My name is Samia Tabassum. In this video, I am going to discuss about indifference curve analysis. The concept of ordinal utility implies that a consumer is capable of comparing different levels of his satisfaction. And a consumer cannot go beyond stating his preference or indifference. The word indifference here means that the consumer wants some quantity of both goods and he derives some satisfaction by consuming some quantities of each good. Preference here means that he prefers one good over the other. Let us get into assumptions of indifference curve analysis. Assumption number 1. More of a commodity is better than less. The more the quantity, the better is the satisfaction. Assumption number 2. Preferences or indifferences of a consumer are transitive. Assumption number 3. Diminishing marginal rate of substitution. What are indifference curves? Indifference curve shows all the combination of goods which provide equal satisfaction to the consumer. In other words, all combination of two goods lying on a consumer's indifference curve are equally desirable or equally preferred by the consumer. The graph here shows quantities of good X and quantities of good Y. Here 4 units of X and 3 units of Y will give same satisfaction of 5 units of good X and 2 units of good Y. The indifference curves do not exactly indicate how much satisfaction is derived from the combination of goods. Indifference map. Indifference map portrays consumer's scale of preferences. Indifference map consists of different sets of indifference curves. The higher is the indifference curve, the higher is the satisfaction the consumer gets. The reason to this is more is better. The more is the quantity of good consumed, the more is the satisfaction the consumer gets. If we rank the satisfaction levels, then the indifference curve number 4 will give more satisfaction than indifference curve number 3, followed by indifference curve number 2 and indifference curve number 1. Properties of indifference curves. Property number 1. Indifference curves slope downwards to the right and they are negatively sloped. Property number 2. Indifference curves are convex to the origin. Property number 3. Indifference curves cannot intersect each other. Property number 4. A higher indifference curve represents higher level of satisfaction and a lower indifference curve represents lower level of satisfaction. Indifference curves of perfect substitutes and perfect complements. In case of perfect substitutes, the indifference curves are straight lines parallel to the origin. The better the substitutes goods are for each other, the closer the indifference curve approaches to the straight line. Indifference curves for perfect complements. Complements are those goods which are used jointly in fixed ratio for consumption so that their consumption increases or decreases simultaneously. Indifference curves of perfect complements are right angled bent towards the origin and they are convex towards the origin. Some non-normal cases of indifference curves, that is goods, bads and neuters. If a commodity is good, then more of it is preferred to less of it. If a commodity is bad, then less is preferred to more. Examples of bads: pollution, risk. Let us look into the graph. Here pollution is a bad and clothing is a normal good. In case of bads, the indifference curves slope upwards and they are positively sloped. Neuter. Neuter is a case of a commodity in which the consumer does not care whether he has more or less of the commodity. That is, more or less of a neuter does not affect the satisfaction of consumer in any way. In the first graph, the good X is a normal good and good Y is a neuter. In case of neuters, the indifference curves are straight lines. In the graph 1, indifference curves are parallel to Y axis as the neuter is present on the Y axis. In the graph 2, good X is a neuter and good Y is a normal good. In this case, indifference curves are parallel to the X axis as the neuter is present on the X axis.